Okay, so core drilling in granite with copper, experimentation versus the lost ancient high technology declarations. Won't be fancy script, it won't be slickly edited, it's just going to be experimentations, looking at it, not just, don't need to take my word for it, I'll show you how to do it, it's very cheap, very easy, and actually takes a short time. So experimentation versus declaration, what happens? Okay, so on the left we see my first experiment, which would be technically a failure, but it was actually failure, and experimentation is the best teacher, and on the right is my second experiment, so where we learn from our mistakes. But even the first experiment, which was not as I intended it to be, actually taught me a lot and goes much further to challenge a lot of these. It's a false claim in regards to what's impossible with primitive techniques, therefore lost high technology claims. And so we'll examine that one first, but here we see again on the left my first experiment. Great teacher, but didn't turn out as intended. On the right, my second experiment. So there you can see how the first one didn't create a circle, it was an almond shape, and the second one was much better. Also note the striations, but also on the left the steps there, again supposedly impossible with primitive techniques. So here's the first experiment. So from one side you see firstly the tapering but the striations, but also notice these steps, these shelves. Now this is a very important feature, because again this is one of the foundation stones in regards to ancient stonework in granite, impossible therefore lost high technology. There we see from the other side. So let's get into it. Okay, so these are the basics, the toolkit for drilling cores in granite with copper. So that was my first experiment, went a little bit off center, but interesting things learnt from there. And that was the second attempt, which was much more successful. The essence is you need weights. I made two of them. One which was heavy, I just put some quick set cement inside of a bucket, and I just left a piece of copper in there just to leave that hole. And I also made a lighter weight just to test, and of course you can put these together, but I found that the lighter weight is actually the better one. This could be made with sandstone very easy. Ancient Egyptians, pretty much everyone had plaster, so although this is quick set cement, the materials can be easily done. Also ancient Egyptian pictures where they just got bags of sand attached to it, so it's just a weight. It's not, however it's made is not really important. Originally this pipe was one section, and the length of it made it a stand-up version. I cut it down into two because I wanted a sit-down version. I think that the stand-up version is better for accuracy, because as it rotates with the weight, it sort of does an action like that. Now when it's shorter, I think it accentuates that and removes more material. If it was straight, it would be less of a wobble in there, and that would be better, but still we can get the concept going. More experiments required. And I just used sticky tape just as a way to stop the weight slipping down. So again, there's all sorts of ways to fix that, so that was just for ease of construction. And I used a whole copper pipe, and instead of going out and finding the right tree branch, I've just got a stand, like a handle I can just insert into the tube and do it that way. So instead of going down and cutting a bunch of tree limbs, we've got gum trees. So the trees that I've got in my area are not the best, so I don't want to go around cutting what few trees I have, or have the neighbours ask questions of why I'm cutting down their branches. So that's the basic element of it. Maybe you might notice in the later video, when I was drilling this core, in this I cut one slit, and that works great for various reasons. In this one I cut 4 slits, and so that doesn't hold the handle quite as well. So if you do notice it in the video later, I do use a clamp on this drill just to lock that into place, but that was the only reason. And I could have used a primitive method of securing it in there. I just wouldn't have cut 4 slits into the copper in the first place. But in case you do notice why I use that, that's why. And so of course you need a piece of granite, and to begin the core you want a guide hole, because the beginning is the difficult part, because otherwise the copper's going to want to slip around. And rather than have someone stand on the end of the block, I just used poster putty, blue tack as we call it, to lock it down, and around the hole where I'm drilling, because I'm going to be using water and putting the sand in there, just a seal to create around there. So just with this poster putty is really just enough to lock it down into place. So again, the drill, I could have used a branch. I'm just using, just for ease of construction, quick set cement, some sticky tape. You could have, of course, you can use all sorts of ways to secure the weight in there, even if, again, you can just tie it with a rope if you're using weighted bags. And just so I've got the one handle, and again, I'm not using tree trunks, I'm cutting people's trees down, that can be inserted in there. If it's too small, I just use some, I just here got popsicle, lollipop, paddle pop sticks, and you can just wedge some, or use another piece of copper just to wedge it in there and to keep it firmly in place. So there's the basic tools. You're going to need some water, and you're going to need an abrasive. River sand will do. I'm using an emery mix, which is a mixture of crushed sandstone, crushed white quartz, and some corundum or aluminium oxide added to the mix. All of what they had back in the day. So that's the basic toolkit. That's what you need to do. And now that I've done those two, I'm going to start another hole, and just to talk a little bit about the technique. So experiments in black granite, drilling with a copper tube in granite using primitive techniques. Experiment number 1 went skew with. However, still a lot to learn from this particular one. Experiment number 2, much better, but still can be improved, and still lessons to be learned. So if we take out the first, well, you can see it's elliptical, not circular. It started out like this, and then because I made a silly boo-boo in the beginning, but I'll explain that, eventually led to that. But all this, failure is the best teacher in terms of experimentation. So I can take that core out. Now on the inside, this one is very roughed and stepped. On that side, it's very smooth. And I drilled at an angle. We'll get to that, but that's the core. It's elliptical. One side we see these striation marks. This is all just done with a hand tool, copper tube. And we also have these steps. Now that would relate to another stone, which is impossible, lost high technology, can't be done with primitive tools, impossible, therefore lost high technology, but no. And there we see the second core, and we'll get some better shots, but there we see those striation marks, which it can only be achieved with high-speed machinery. Insert random sciencey words like feed rate and bamboozle people with this and make it sound all legitimate. I have many science degrees, blah blah blah. Well, a scientist would do experiments, but anyway, we'll examine this more. These are just the first 2 experiments, and we'll go into how it was done and what we can learn from that. This stain is just left over from the blue tack or poster putty sealer. That stain's going to dry out and disappear in a short time anyway, so that's not a permanent stain. But okay, black granite, how was this done? What lessons can be learned if you do experimentations, and how to spot the cheap psychological tricks, trickery, that lost high technology people will purport, and that's an important, that has to be said, because it is a con. They suppress information, they make a lot of claims which are just diabolically false, and the truth shall set you free. And so we'll look at those, but first we'll do the experiment and then analyze it a little bit more towards the end, and hopefully you'll be able to spot the con and the tricky narrative that goes into this, and hopefully you'll be able to
some people would be able to save many thousands of dollars going on bogus tours spouting, wouldn't even qualify as pseudoscience, just absolute nonsense.
Alright, so here are the first two samples of core drilling using copper in granite, and there we see the top profile, and I'll explain firstly how I made this mistake, but what this mistake had to teach me. And there we see on the right the second one, and there we do see the circular pattern that we want to get there. So firstly this one, and so again sort of like the almond shape, and one side is very smooth with these striations, and you might sort of note that the striations do not run parallel with the top of the sample, and I'll explain it, but that's basically because of the way the drill works, poor technique on my behalf as well. On the other half, however, it is not straight. We have these shelves which have formed, and well, that's important. This will relate to one of these other impossible to recreate without modern precision tools, therefore lost ancient high technology. Well, I'll examine that a bit more because that's an important feature. And there we see the second core drill. Okay, so I cut it to length, so sitting down version, but the way that this can be applied to other tool construction techniques in the ancient world, but it was a bit tricky to start, for, not just get the hole, but to get the rhythm, the pattern to it. And so you spin it, and then, well, you have to experiment to see it, but the squeakiness is because I haven't put the abrasive or the water in there, but that's the basic part of it. I'll just
Okay, so I've used my template to begin my hole and to begin drilling this core, and part of it is I want to show the pattern that emerges, because if you have like a solid copper tube, or if you have a split tube, it will give different forms. But as the first demonstration, for instance, Dennis Stocks, I'll go through some of the background info on there as well, and some of the absurd misinformation, we could call it that as well. So black granite, copper tube, drilling a core hole.
Okay, so when I first began, I thought it'd be natural to spin in the other direction, so going clockwise, but now I've found it's better, at least for me, being right-handed probably going counterclockwise is better. Really just, you grab the weight, give it a spin, and when you begin you'll sort of be wobbling around, and that's good to start off with, and then you can sort of find yourself more in the center, because that wobbling action is going to affect the shape of the core hole, and well, actually gives it this impossible to achieve tapered effect. Once again, it's just nature taking its course, just the rule of things. And so get your handle, spin, get used to that, and then you'll find where it's time to kick in and get your rhythm going. Okay, just because of I've already begun the hole, it's just a matter of now finding
template position, make sure it'll soon fall in that groove, but just to get it started. And now it's just a matter of drilling. So here we see my first attempt with a drill hole using just a copper tube into granite, and you learn from your mistakes, so you should be able to notice it's rather elliptical, this one, and of course the groove that's being cut is quite large. Now depends on the angle, you can also, especially on this side it's curved, or not curved, it's sloped downwards, but on this side of the hole it's quite vertical. Now the reason for the ellipse was, firstly, to begin with, the template that I used, I rough cut this. I should have used a more circular hole, and then I removed it too quickly, so I only had a narrow, a very shallow channel around the outside, and I took this away and just used that channel to guide the tube. But what happens is that because it began so wide, as the tube goes around, it doesn't just spin on its central axis, it's spinning around like in a, I've got that heavy weight on the end, but it's in a wobble shape like that. And so what's happening is that the inside of a drill, as it gets forced in one direction, so it's getting forced to not just around in a circle but side to side, the inside part of the tube is rubbing up against that core plug, and because of the nature of the spin, and there's a human element to it, it's not drilling perfectly down, and I have a like the shape of the angle which my handle is going to be would that be the heavy point or the soft point, but the weight is throwing the drill to the side as the weight is pushing it down as well. And because I've been sitting in the same position throughout this, that's why it's tapered in one direction, because the drill's sliding from one side to the other more than up and down, because of the nature of spinning in the human form, the wheel not being perfectly balanced, not being perfectly centered. And because I removed that template so early, it's accentuated that. So the deeper I go, the more circular it becomes, but that's a big mistake, is to keep your template in as long as you can. That would be, so for my next attempt, to learn there, and to spend a little bit more time developing your first groove to get that very, very accurate, and then follow it down. But that's the progress report so far, and because it is a little bit, because I started it so poorly, but you still start to see the sense of these grooves that go around there. Once it's drilled through, we'll be able to look at it. So even though it's not a perfect core, being my first experiment, the grooves, as you can probably, not the camera's matching up, and there's still a bit of mud in there to obscure the view, but what we're getting is the exact same grooves. This is not a high-speed drill, but we're achieving, supposedly impossible without a high speed, high flow, I use these terms, but just easy experiments to do for yourself, very cheap, just an off-cut piece of granite, a copper tube. You can make the weight out of anything. Carve one from sandstone, have a permanent one in your Stone Age toolkit, or just to just to do the experiment, you just need a round bucket or a round container, pour some cement in it, and then away you go, and you have your weight. So it's easy to find a stick with that forked piece coming off it to use as your handle. But that's the first experiment. Just washed it out to have a look, and similar I mentioned in the copper cutting, that you don't actually lose very little. In future I'm going to make a special attention to measure the copper, but just like cutting granite with a copper blade, I did a wash and just put it under the shower head, and there you can see that all the little particles of copper that have worn off, almost like panning for gold, because they're heavy, they stay there and stick at the bottom. So that's another example of, firstly, you don't lose much copper, and the copper that you lose can be recycled by panning, just washing out the mud, the slurry that you use, and the copper will sit to the bottom. So that's like another element in regards to it. But that's how it's washed out. Just wanted to check the depth, because I'm about to hit the bottom, so I just want to be sure where I am.
Okay, so we begin with the basic toolkit. Most of these you should be able to find laying around your home, in your shed or whatever. Really, you're probably looking at Australian dollars, $50 at the most to do this toolkit, and it just requires a few hours of effort to be, on your behalf, to test this for yourself. You don't need to trust me, you don't need to trust anyone else. This experiment can be done at home very cheaply and very quickly. And so on the first attempt I made a few mistakes, but from your mistakes you'll learn. Mistakes are the best teacher. And so I had created this groove, and it was only shallow, but I removed the wooden guide too early. Luckily I did that because I learnt from that. So and then I used poster putty, blue tack, whatever you want to call it, plasticine, just to create a little wall around the outside, just to hold the water and the abrasive mix in there. The circle began to become elliptical very quickly because I removed the guide too early, and just as the copper tube drills downwards, the abrasive is also acting on the sides of the walls, which is also grinding away at the walls. That was a big mistake for me to remove the guide too early, but I did learn a lot from that. So here we see a view of the the circle now becoming an ellipse, but I kept at it because I did notice I was going to revisit this in later on, but it's a good example of what we can learn from our mistakes. So there we see the original circle, and the circle moves over to the side because of the nature of that particular drill. Your handle, there are sort of 2 points where the most power is brought in and out, and that causes the drill to move sideways as well. So also I was too aggressive with the drill. I was really trying to be fast, and I used a heavy weight to push down on it. Also a mistake, but from that I learned. So here we can see the side of the walls, and there we see these striations. This is with a low speed copper tube, hand operated, and I'll show you the better focus pictures, but you also see it on the core itself. So again, these striations by Christopher Dunn and the whole Lost High technology community are described as impossible with primitive techniques, and therefore evidence of high speed, high feed rate, etc., etc. Absolutely untrue. But more importantly, from the other side, notice these shelves, these steps, which appeared as a drill moves sideways. It doesn't go down at a curve, it sort of skips. And this is an important feature, very, very important. So just to highlight these shelves, these steps, again described as impossible without modern high speed, high feed rate. They use all sorts of buzzwords to make it sound very sciencey, but it's the opposite of that. So there we see, it's just a copper tube, hand powered, not high speed, not a high feed rate, not all of this. It has to be, each revolution goes down 1 millimeter, etc. Absolute rubbish, absolute nonsense. So similar, I'll post a link in the description. I posted this earlier using a straight piece of copper bar, copper handsaw. I created the so-called giant circular saw. Marks impossible without a high-speed steel giant circular saw. That is absolute rubbish. I began with a copper blade. There was the first picture where it was straight, and then we see it becoming slightly curved, and then it becomes more and more curved because of the action, because I didn't carry the blade to the very end of the stone. It was only part way to the, and then back and forth, and this recreated the so-called impossible thing. But this will be relevant because we come back to, for instance, this stone. I believe it's at Abu Sir. Again, high-speed circular saws, and look at this step. That's impossible with primitive technology. Look at these striations. It's impossible with copper, copper tools indeed. And Egyptologists mainstream say sand. It's all blah 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 blah. Well, because especially notice this step. Well, isn't that funny? Isn't that interesting? I created that with so I've only done a few experiments in regards to granite and stone and copper tools, and combined a few experiments, replications that I've done of existing experiments and a few of my own. Combined, they are more than all of the Lost High Technology channels combined, because effectively they've done zero experimentations. They make a lot of declarations. They make a lot of quotes. They like to throw shade on people. Well, please show me an example where these Lost High Technology science experts, blah blah blah, high feed rates, etc. Have you seen one experiment that they've done? They make a lot of declarations. They like to invoke science, but science is experimentation. They've done zero experimentation, and what's more, we'll get to that in a moment. So. Okay, now I'm going to replicate this in the future. I had a good idea how it was done, and that was why this first core drill experiment, why I didn't stop after I realized my first mistake of removing the guide too early, because I noticed these steps. That's what happens when you actually do the work, you learn. So observation is a passive science, and experimentation is an active science. And so when they invoke science, I'm a science, I have multiple science degrees, blah, blah, blah. Well, zero experimentation on their behalf. And so they throw, what's good for the goose, good for the gander. So it's all about experiments, and they've done zero. And what's more, we'll get to that in a moment. So here we see the steps, the shelves indicating a lost ancient high technology advanced machinery. Well, I achieved it with a hand-powered copper saw. And we also have the striations. Note those as well of the different scales. We'll get more into that in the future. And the shelves and the steps. So with two birds with one stone at this case, both the striations and this step. Well, one experiment, gone, finished, it's done. But of course, this will be suppressed. They won't address it. They'll refuse to debate. So whether it's lost technology, whoever it is. So some of them will try and differentiate themselves from ancient aliens. But whether it's a lost, advanced, high technology civilization, or whether it was impossible for humans, therefore ancient aliens, they do have several things in common, and that is, well, lots of declarations, but zero experimentations. Also, they refuse to debate outside of their safe space. They delete and hide comments while milking people out of their hard-earned money. They like to throw shade on people who actually do the work. They'll use one example of Dennis Stocks in this old documentary. They won't show his published works. They won't show his other lectures. They won't show the other demonstrations that have been done. They need to ignore this evidence. They need to pretend it doesn't exist. They'll make claims that it does not exist. They'll make claims that the mainstream Egyptologists ignore the evidence of lost high technology. This is untrue. They know it's untrue, and that's why they delete comments. That's why they suppress comments. That's why they hide comments. Now, it's one thing, like deleting comments is bad enough, but what they do is they'll hide comments. And so you might not be familiar with this feature, especially on YouTube, but you can hide a comment. And that means that while you're logged into your account, the comment appears to be there. It's shadow banning. So you'll see your comment and you go, well, I'm not getting, my comment's not being engaged. No one's, responding to this. That is the worst kind of censorship, and they do that frequently. Well, I've had it done to me, and I've had other people report it as well when they respond to this Lost High Technology channels. Brian Foster, Uncharted X, Kemet School, all of these, they all do it. They claim that there is suppression going on and that the mainstream ignores this and won't deal with it. The exact opposite is true. They're the ones who suppress information. They're the ones who actively suppress and censor information. And the reason for that is it threatens their income stream. Several words to describe this type of behavior. None of them are complimentary. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If they can say these things, well, now I'm off the leash, and I can call them out for what they are, and that is nothing nice to be said about them. This is not just an issue of opinion and analysis. This is an opinion. This is a issue of character, and they are not of good character. There's no other way around that. So they can say these things. Well, now they're open to those same observations, and what you'll find is that on the opposite side, that the people who are trying to show you primitive technology, they don't suppress comments, they don't censor comments, they don't hide comments. And when they make a claim against the Lost High Technology Ancient Aliens crowd, they do it with evidence, experimentation, and more importantly, proof. So whether it's Hidden Inca tours and now this new Uncharted Egypt Ancient Technology tour, both of them you'll see the Kemet School being frequently invoked. Well, so it's money is involved here. So not including flight costs, they're going to take you and and they'll point at stones and they'll say impossible, therefore Lost High Technology. Well, you don't need to, for a few dollars and a few hours invested in experimentation, you can save yourself or a friend of yours of being milked, grifted of a lot of money by, at best, incompetence, at the very worst, outright grifters. And they'll use sciencey terms, and they'll say science, and they'll say, oh, the mainstream ignores this. No, they're suppressing it. They're ignoring it, and they've done zero experimentation in regards to this. What they say in regards to copper, granite, ancient lifting technology is pure, it's pure bunk. Now, whether it's because they simply have not, they want to charge people to go on tours, lots of money. These are good. Don't waste your money on these, at the best, incompetence and at the very worst, outright con men. Either they have not done the work in regards to ancient technology, primitive technology, copper, granite, etc. They have not done that, that's for sure. Or maybe they have, but they're suppressing it. But there is no nice work. This is BS. So whether it's BS because they really believe that, and they haven't bothered to do the work, they haven't bothered to research, they haven't bothered to test for themselves, but given the fact that they suppress, hide, delete, block people who provide the alternative to their claims and the evidence for that and the proof for that, I would lean more towards the grifter. That would be my belief. And so, I believe in capitalism. I'm a firm capitalist. So if you want to, go for it. But I would implore you, before you go, do a little bit of research. I'll put some links into Dennis Stock's Scientists Against Myth channel, the Alexander Sokolov channel, and others who demonstrate through experimentation that what these people claim, Lost High Technology, cannot be done, cannot be lifted, cannot be cut, is incorrect. 100% incorrect. And so that's the scam, or the good whether they're good intentions or bad intentions, it doesn't matter. It is rubbish. It is wrong. It is false. It's not science. It's not science-based. It's not backed by experimentation. It, it's wrong. There's no other way around it. And again, at the best, incompetence, they being and at the very worst, outright grifters. And again, if you need to delete comments, if you want to say, well, leave a comment and then you delete, block, hide, etc. Well, then it's no nice way around that. You need to be called. If you want to call out other people, well, you want to get called out for your BS, and I'm directly calling you out for your BS, not based on opinion, based on experimentation. So there it is.
On the other half, however, it is not straight. We have these shelves which have formed, and well, that's important. This will relate to one of these other impossible to recreate without modern precision tools, therefore lost ancient high technology. Well, I'll examine that a bit more because that's an important feature. And there we see the second core drill, and of course that one is circular. I improved the technique. It's still actually a little bit elliptical, but that was only my second attempt. I'm going to improve on that. And again, if you put a little bit of you see it darkens up because of oil on my fingers there. We still see the, zoom in, the striations. And there are a few interesting features in there, but this only being 2 samples, we need a little bit more. But what we have in here, in essence, is also the tapering. Now the top of it is really good. At the bottom, I did go a little bit off. I was rushing just to get the last few millimeters to drill through, but the tapering effect, where the top of it is narrower than the bottom, that is also said to be impossible to achieve with primitive technology, primitive techniques. Actually, it's impossible not to achieve it with this particular type of primitive technique, and those who say impossible and like to poo-poo the establishment, etc., say no one's looking into this. Well, again, if they'd done any actual experimentation based on the many documents and samples that have been done, they would know this. But of course, it's important to the industry that this, just the same narrative over and over again. I've only done, I will get to that, but that's the second. Now these are in, let's just call it black granite. So this would also relate especially to the Serapeum. So it's often black granite is given this, or andesite is given sort of these, I suppose, quasi-mystical properties. But so that's the final samples. How did we achieve this? It's actually very easy, it's very cheap, and it's actually very quick to do, which I believe speaks a lot about those who promote ancient aliens, lost high ancient technology, civilizations, and that, well, with a few short hours of experimentation. But of course, I don't see that being done because the wheels fall off the wagon. Okay, but how did we do this?
Okay, in the next part, I'll showcase experiment number 2, the striations. I didn't make the noobish mistakes I made in the first one. Improved my technique. We'll go into that as well. So again, you don't need to take my word for it. With some very cheap tools, materials, you can recreate this at home. You can do it yourself. It's very cheap. Only takes a very short time to do. And before you invest and spend all this money on advanced, it's impossible. Look, I'm pointing at a stone. I say it's impossible. Blah blah blah. Science, high feed rate, all this pseudoscience dressed up as scientific analysis. You can do the experiments, and there it is. And again, this will be suppressed. This will be ignored, but that'll be for the next part. This is SGD. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.